When the world falls silent and humanity drifts into sleep, another world awakens, one hidden from human eyes, yet closer than we imagine. A world inhabited by beings created from smokeless fire, moving unseen through our homes and streets, witnessing what we cannot, and fighting battles beyond human perception. There was a time, long before our own, when this hidden realm was not hidden at all. A time when the veil between worlds had not yet been drawn. Humans and Jinn walked the same earth, saw one another clearly, and spoke face to face without fear or mystery. The unseen was visible, and the spiritual world stood open before mankind. Tonight we step back into that forgotten age, an era when two creations shared one space, when divine wisdom allowed the boundaries between dimensions to remain thin. This is not myth, legend, or fantasy. It is a reality preserved in the Quran, confirmed by authentic Hadith, and known to the earliest generations of believers. We will uncover why Allah, in His perfect wisdom, chose to separate these worlds, what caused the unseen to be veiled from human sight, and how this hidden reality continues to influence our lives today. Prepare yourself to reflect deeply, to question what you think you know, and to glimpse a world that exists beyond the limits of human vision. Our story begins at the dawn of creation, when Allah the Almighty breathed life into Adam, peace be upon him, and honored him above all other creations. Even before humanity set foot upon the earth, the Jinn had already existed for countless ages. They lived upon this world long before us, building societies and civilizations beyond human imagination. Created from smokeless fire, they were gifted with intellect, free will, and moral choice, capable of obedience or rebellion, faith or disbelief. Unlike human beings, the Jinn were able to perceive both realms at once. They moved effortlessly between the physical and the spiritual, seeing what is hidden from us today and witnessing realities beyond human perception. When Adam and Hawa, peace be upon them both, were sent down to earth after their time in paradise, they entered a world already inhabited by these ancient beings. The earliest generations of humanity were not like us. Their hearts were pure, untouched by generations of sin and spiritual corruption. Their souls remained close to their original fitra, the natural state upon which Allah created mankind. Because of this spiritual clarity, they were able to perceive truths that have since been concealed from human sight. According to authentic Islamic sources, early humans could see the Jinn as clearly as they saw one another. They witnessed their true forms, beings of fire and wind, some breathtaking in beauty, others terrifying in appearance. The believing Jinn appeared radiant and luminous, their presence calm and peaceful. The disbelieving Jinn, the shayateen among them, appeared twisted and dreadful, their forms dark and disturbing, their voices harsh and unsettling. In those days, the struggle between truth and falsehood was not hidden. It was visible, unfolding before human eyes. Humans and Jinn would gather in the same places, walk the same lands, and trade in the same markets. At times, they even formed alliances. The righteous among both creations stood together in worship of Allah, while the corrupt among them plotted rebellion against their Creator. Each species possessed qualities the other lacked, knowledge, abilities, and perspectives that were exchanged and shared. Yet this coexistence was not without conflict. Tensions arose, leading to struggles and battles that shaped the course of ancient history. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, informed us that the Jinn, like humans, were sent prophets who called them to the worship of Allah alone. These messengers addressed gatherings where humans and Jinn stood side by side, receiving the same divine message. The Quran itself tells us of the moment when a group of Jinn listened to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reciting its verses, then returned to their people as warners. But in the earliest stages of humanity, such interactions were far more common and openly witnessed. Imagine standing in a gathering where beings of fire and light sat beside human beings, all listening to the same call to guidance, all facing the same choice between belief and disbelief. A time when the unseen was no longer hidden, and the reality of the spiritual world stood plainly before mankind. The scholars of Islamic history tell us about the great kings and rulers of the past who commanded both human and jinn armies. The most famous of these was Prophet Sulaiman, peace be upon him, who was granted by Allah the ability to command the jinn and make them work under his authority. But Sulaiman's case was special. A unique miracle granted to him alone among all of creation was more natural. Before his time, however, the interaction between humans and jinn was more natural and commonplace, though not involving the same level of control and command that Allah granted to Sulaiman. These ancient rulers would have jinn advisors in their courts, would consult with them on matters of governance and warfare, and would sometimes send jinn messengers to distant lands because of their ability to travel vast distances in short periods of time. But why were humans able to see the jinn so clearly in those days? And why has this ability been lost to us spiritually? The answer lies in understanding the spiritual evolution of humanity and the wisdom of Allah in how He manages the relationship between the seen and unseen worlds. As generations passed and humanity moved further away from the time of Adam, peace be upon him, the spiritual purity that characterized the early people began to diminish. Sins accumulated in human hearts, causing a gradual clouding of spiritual vision. The more humanity engaged in disobedience to Allah, the thicker the veil became between them and the unseen realm. The early Islamic scholars explained that this gradual separation was actually a mercy from Allah, protecting humanity from spiritual harm. When humans could see the jinn clearly, they were also more susceptible to their influence and manipulation. The disbelieving jinn would use their visible presence to mislead humans, to convince them to worship them instead of Allah, and to lead them astray from the straight path. By gradually veiling the jinn from human sight, Allah protected the majority of humanity from falling into shirk and spiritual corruption. Now, only those with exceptional spiritual purity, or those whom Allah specially blesses, can perceive the jinn directly. And even then, such experiences are rare and usually serve specific divine purposes. The transition from the age of visible jinn to our current era did not happen overnight. Historical accounts describe a gradual process that took place over many centuries. First, the ability to see jinn clearly became limited to certain individuals, those who were exceptionally pious or who had been granted special spiritual gifts. Then, even these individuals could only see jinn under specific circumstances, during particular times of day or in certain locations where the veil between worlds was thinner. Eventually, the sight of jinn became so rare that when it did occur, it was considered a miraculous event, something worth recording and remembering for generations. The authentic sources tell us about the last known widespread interaction between humans and jinn, occurring during the time just before and during the prophetic mission of Muhammad, peace be upon him. The jinn would regularly ascend to the lower heavens to eavesdrop on the conversations of angels and bring back news of the unseen to fortune-tellers and soothsayers on earth. But when the final prophet, peace be upon him, was sent, Allah strengthened the guards of the heavens, and the jinn found themselves pelted with shooting stars whenever they tried to listen to the divine communications. This event marked the final severing of many connections between the human and jinn worlds, as one of their primary methods of interaction through the sharing of hidden knowledge was cut off. The Quran records the conversation of the jinn when they realized that something momentous had happened in the heavens, leading them to search for and find the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, reciting the Quran. But what was life really like during those extraordinary times when humans and jinn coexisted visibly? The historical accounts paint a picture of a world far more complex and mysterious than we can imagine today. In the ancient marketplaces, jinn merchants would sell goods that existed partially in the spiritual realm. These items could provide protection against evil spirits or enhance human perception of the unseen world. Human craftsmen would work alongside jinn artisans, learning techniques that involved manipulating both physical materials and spiritual energies. The resulting artifacts were said to possess properties that purely human-made items could never achieve. Objects that could ward off evil, heal diseases, or provide insight into hidden truths. The architecture of ancient cities reflected this dual existence, with buildings designed to accommodate both human and jinn inhabitants. Certain areas of cities were designated as neutral zones where both species could gather safely, while other areas were restricted to one group or the other based on their spiritual nature and requirements. The grand mosques and temples of those times were constructed with knowledge of how to harmonize the physical and spiritual dimensions, creating spaces where worship could be conducted by both humans and believing jinn simultaneously. These buildings incorporated geometric patterns and acoustic designs that resonated with both material and ethereal forms of existence, allowing prayers and supplications to be elevated to Allah through multiple dimensions of reality. The educational systems of ancient civilizations included instruction in both human and jinn knowledge. Students would learn not only about the physical sciences and arts that humans had developed, but also about the spiritual sciences that the jinn had mastered over their millennia of existence. This included knowledge of different dimensions, the ability to travel through spiritual realms, methods of protection against evil entities, and techniques for purifying the soul to achieve higher states of consciousness. The greatest scholars of those times were those who had mastered knowledge from both worlds, who could understand the interconnections between the physical and spiritual aspects of existence, and who could guide their students in navigating the complex realities of a multi-dimensional universe. Such comprehensive education produced individuals with capabilities that would seem miraculous by today's standards. People who could heal through spiritual means, communicate across vast distances without physical instruments, and perceive truths hidden from ordinary observation. The legal systems of ancient societies had to account for crimes and disputes involving both humans and jinn. Special courts were established with judges trained in the laws governing both species, and legal procedures were developed for cases where members of different realms came into conflict. Witness testimony had to be evaluated differently when it came from jinn, whose perception of time and space differed from that of humans, and whose motivations and cultural norms were not always aligned with human understanding. Punishments had to be designed to be effective for beings with different natures and vulnerabilities, taking into account the fact that what might deter a human might not affect a jinn, and vice versa. These legal systems represented some of the most sophisticated approaches to justice ever developed, requiring judges and lawyers to understand not just human nature and behavior, but the psychology and spiritual dynamics of multiple species and dimensions. Trade and commerce in the age of visible jinn operated on principles that we can barely comprehend today. Value was determined not just by material scarcity and utility, but by spiritual properties and dimensional significance. A simple stone might be worth more than gold if it possessed protective qualities, or if it had been blessed in a particular way. Contracts had to account for the different relationship to time that jinn possessed, their ability to travel instantly across great distances, and their access to knowledge from the unseen realm. The currency systems of those times included not just physical coins and goods, but also spiritual assets such as blessings, protection, knowledge, and access to hidden treasures that existed in parallel dimensions. The medical practices of ancient times incorporated healing techniques that worked on both the physical and spiritual levels. Physicians understood that many illnesses originated from disturbances in the spiritual realm and could only be cured by addressing their root causes in the unseen world. Jinn healers possessed knowledge of remedies and treatments that operated purely on the spiritual level, while human doctors focused on the physical manifestations of disease and injury. The most effective healing occurred when practitioners from both realms worked together, combining their different but complementary areas of expertise to address illness from all possible angles. Patients might receive treatment that included physical medicines, spiritual cleansing, protective prayers, and energy work that operated across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this ancient era was the nature of warfare when it involved both humans and Jinn forces. Battles were fought on multiple levels simultaneously, with physical combat taking place alongside spiritual warfare in the unseen realm. Victory often depended not just on military strategy and physical prowess, but on spiritual strength, purity of intention, and the favor of Allah. Armies would include both human soldiers and Jinn allies, each contributing their unique capabilities to the war effort. Jinn forces could scout enemy positions instantly, disrupt enemy communications through spiritual interference, and attack on levels that purely human armies could not even perceive. The intelligence-gathering capabilities available to ancient military commanders included access to information from across multiple dimensions and realms. Jinn scouts could observe enemy movements from the spiritual realm, where physical obstacles like mountains, walls, and distance posed no barriers. They could listen to private conversations, observe secret meetings, and gather intelligence that would be impossible for human spies to obtain. However, enemy forces with their own Jinn allies could deploy spiritual countermeasures, creating wards and protections that blocked such reconnaissance, leading to arms races in spiritual technology and defensive techniques. The complexity of these multidimensional conflicts required military leaders who understood warfare on levels that modern generals cannot even conceive of. The gradual separation of the human and Jinn worlds was marked by specific historical events and transitions that changed the nature of existence for both species. One of the most significant of these occurred when the knowledge of true names and spiritual essences began to be hidden from human perception. In the early ages, humans could perceive the spiritual names and natures of Jinn, allowing them to understand their true intentions and capabilities. This knowledge prevented deception and manipulation, as it was impossible for evil Jinn to disguise their nature from human perception. When this ability was lost, humans became more vulnerable to spiritual deception, but they also gained protection from the overwhelming spiritual information that could drive them to madness or despair. Another crucial transition occurred when the pathways between dimensions became increasingly restricted. In the earliest times, movement between the physical and spiritual realms was relatively easy for those who knew the proper techniques and possessed the necessary spiritual purity. Humans could visit spiritual realms and return with knowledge and experiences that enriched their understanding of existence. Jinn could manifest fully in the physical world, taking on solid forms and interacting with material objects as easily as humans do. As these pathways became more restricted, both species found themselves increasingly confined to their native dimensions, able to influence each other, but no longer able to truly cross over and experience life in the other realm. The role of prophets and messengers during the transition period was significant, as they served as bridges between the separating worlds. These holy individuals retained the ability to perceive and interact with the jinn, even as this capacity was being withdrawn from ordinary humans. They could still receive revelations that came through spiritual channels, communicate with angels and righteous jinn, and access knowledge from the unseen realm. Their missions often involved teaching humans how to navigate the new reality of a more separated existence, how to maintain spiritual awareness without being overwhelmed by it, and how to continue benefiting from the guidance of the unseen world even when they could no longer see it directly. The final prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him, represented the culmination of this process, serving as the last direct link between humanity and the full revelation of divine knowledge. The wisdom behind Allah's decision to gradually separate these worlds becomes clearer when we understand the spiritual development of humanity as a whole. In the early ages, when humans possessed greater spiritual purity and closer connection to their original nature, they could handle direct interaction with the jinn without being corrupted or misled. But as human society became more complex and human hearts became more polluted with sin, this direct interaction became spiritually dangerous. The majority of humans began to lose the discernment necessary to distinguish between righteous and evil jinn, making them susceptible to manipulation and spiritual corruption. By veiling the jinn from human sight, Allah protected humanity from falling into widespread shirk and spiritual confusion, while still allowing for limited interaction when necessary for specific divine purposes. The modern world bears the traces of this ancient interaction in ways that most people do not recognize. Many of the legends, myths, and folklore traditions from around the world contain distorted memories of the time when humans and jinn coexisted visibly. Stories of giants, demons, spirits, and magical beings found in every culture often represent corrupted accounts of actual historical interactions between humans and various types of jinn. The knowledge systems preserved in certain esoteric traditions, while often mixed with falsehood and innovation, sometimes contain fragments of the authentic wisdom that was once shared between the two species. Archaeological sites around the world contain structures and artifacts that can only be fully understood when we recognize that they were created during a time when beings with capabilities beyond normal human ability were actively involved in their construction. The implications of this hidden history for contemporary Muslims are profound and important to understand. While we no longer live in an age of visible jinn interaction, we still exist in a universe where the unseen realm is very real and very active. The jinn continue to exist, continue to influence human affairs, and continue to be either allies or enemies in our spiritual journey, even though we cannot see them directly. Understanding this history helps us appreciate the reality of the unseen world, the importance of spiritual protection, and the wisdom of the Islamic practices that shield us from negative spiritual influences. The Quran and Sunnah provide us with all the guidance we need to navigate our relationship with the unseen realm safely and beneficially, even without the direct sight that our predecessors possessed. The authentic Islamic sources provide us with detailed guidance on how to interact properly with the unseen realm in our current age. The daily prayers, recitation of Quranic verses, and remembrance of Allah create spiritual environments that attract righteous spiritual entities while repelling harmful ones. The seeking of refuge with Allah through specific supplications provides protection against the malevolent among the jinn who might seek to harm or mislead us. The maintenance of ritual purity, both physical and spiritual, creates barriers that evil entities cannot cross while opening channels for beneficial spiritual influence. These practices represent the distilled wisdom of thousands of years of human-jinn interaction, refined and perfected by divine revelation to provide optimal spiritual protection and benefit. The accounts preserved within Islamic tradition about the righteous among the jinn remind us of an essential truth. Not every unseen being is an enemy of humanity. The Quran speaks of jinn, who, upon hearing the Prophet Muhammad recite the words of divine revelation, accepted Islam and returned to their people as guides and warners. These believing jinn continue to exist to this day, worshipping Allah alongside believing humans. Though their devotion now unfolds mostly within the unseen realm, their presence stands as a powerful reminder that the struggle between good and evil is not confined to one world alone. It spans multiple realms, and our choices in this life carry weight far beyond what our physical eyes can perceive. Every act of righteousness or corruption does not affect us alone. Our deeds ripple outward, influencing the greater balance between light and darkness throughout creation. Faith, sincerity, and obedience strengthen this balance, while neglect and sin weaken it. In this way, human beings remain active participants in a cosmic struggle that extends across dimensions known and unknown. For the believer today, understanding this hidden history offers profound insight. It expands our perception of reality, teaching us that the visible world is only one layer of a far greater and more intricate creation. This awareness deepens our appreciation for the completeness of Islamic guidance, a guidance that directs not only our relationships with other people, but also our interaction with the unseen realm. It heightens our spiritual awareness, reminding us that our actions are witnessed and influenced by beings whose existence lies beyond the physical plane. Most importantly, this knowledge strengthens our reliance upon Allah. It encourages us to hold firmly to authentic Islamic practices, prayer, remembrance, and adherence to prophetic guidance, which serve as protection and illumination amid complex spiritual realities. Although the era in which humans and jinn encountered one another openly has passed, its significance continues to echo through every aspect of our spiritual lives. It reminds us that we inhabit a universe filled with conscious creation, that our choices carry consequences across multiple dimensions, and that Allah's guidance is sufficient to lead us safely through every unseen challenge we may face. Whether visible or hidden, the jinn remain part of this shared universe, and our success in this world and the hereafter depends on navigating our path with wisdom, faith, and restraint. The separation of these worlds was not an ending, but a transformation. It marked a shift in the nature of the human test, one that now requires faith without sight. This test is more demanding, yet it is also an act of divine mercy, protecting humanity from spiritual forces beyond our capacity to confront directly. The path to success has never changed. Submission to Allah, following the guidance of His messengers, and striving to purify the heart in preparation for the final return. Though we now walk this path without witnessing the full spiritual reality around us, its truth remains unchanged. The unseen does not become unreal simply because it is hidden. Rather, it calls us to walk with deeper trust, stronger faith, and unwavering reliance on the divine light that guides us forward. As we conclude this journey into the hidden history of creation, we are left with a profound appreciation for the wisdom and mercy of Allah in how He has shaped the relationship between the seen and unseen throughout human history. The era of visible interaction served a purpose, but its conclusion marked an evolution toward a more refined and elevated form of spiritual connection. Today, our engagement with the unseen occurs through prayer, supplication, Quranic recitation, and remembrance of Allah, means that purify the soul while shielding it from harm. The righteous among the jinn remain allies in the greater struggle for truth, while the rebellious among them serve as trials that strengthen faith when met with knowledge and sincerity. May Allah grant us insight into these realities, protect our hearts from misguidance, and grant us the strength to walk this path with faith until we return to Him.